They say home is where the heart is. But what happens when that heart is shattered, not by an outsider but by someone meant to protect you? In the quiet suburbs of Marion County, Florida, a 15-year-old boy was visiting his father for summer vacation. It was supposed to be a break, a few weeks of family bonding, late-night video games, and barbecues. Instead, it ended in betrayal, trauma, and a criminal investigation. Her name is Alexis Yates, a nurse, a wife, a stepmother, and now an accused sexual predator.
Alexis Yates appeared, at least on the outside, to have it all. A professional career in nursing, a stable home, a blended family. In the eyes of her neighbors, she was calm, polite, and helpful. The type of woman who offered a smile in the grocery store line. The kind who wore scrubs, not handcuffs. Her husband, a middle-aged Florida resident, shared custody of his 15-year-old son with his ex. And like many co-parents during the summer months, he welcomed the teen into his home for a few weeks of reconnection. The boy, whose identity remains confidential due to his age, was no stranger to Alexis. She had helped raise him, played the cool stepmom role, brought him snacks, laughed at his jokes. For years he probably thought she was safe, maybe even trusted her more than his own parents. But behind the quiet Florida walls of that home, a secret was forming, one that would soon explode into the light, in the most disturbing way imaginable. According to a report filed with Marion County authorities, the boy claimed something unthinkable happened. He alleges that one night he and Alexis Yates had sex, not hidden away in secrecy but right there in the living room. The home where his father lived. The room where family dinners were eaten, where holidays were celebrated. And the most shocking detail? His father, Alexis's husband, allegedly walked in during the act. What exactly the father saw remains unclear. But according to court records, he was the one who alerted authorities. A moment that would rip his family apart in an instant. The 15-year-old was taken in for questioning, and what he told investigators launched a full-blown criminal probe. Alexis Yates, once a trusted stepmother, was now under suspicion of a crime that could destroy not only her freedom, but her entire career. On June 2025, Alexis Yates was officially charged with sexual battery on a person under 18, a felony offense in Florida that carries life-altering consequences, including potential prison time and permanent placement on the sexual offender registry. And then came another consequence, her job. As a licensed nurse, Alexis's profession required trust, accountability, and above all, the ability to care for others without harm. But with these new allegations, the Florida Board of Nursing began reviewing her license. Could a woman accused of violating her own stepson still be allowed to work in healthcare? Once a sexual battery charge is on the table, any professional license is in serious jeopardy, especially in nursing, where safeguarding vulnerable individuals is the core of the job. If convicted, she'll likely never work in healthcare again. For the boy, now a victim in the eyes of the law, the damage was already done. His summer had turned into an emotional war zone. He would now face trauma, scrutiny, therapy, and possibly a courtroom testimony against someone who once tucked him into bed. The stepmom, the teen, and the living room secret, a family torn apart. The days that followed were filled with shock, confusion, and silence. Marion County Sheriff's deputies began their investigation, treating the 15-year-old's report with urgency. The home was searched, digital devices seized. And Alexis Yates? She was brought in for questioning. During the interview, Alexis reportedly denied all allegations. But investigators weren't convinced. The boy's statement was detailed, painfully so. Enough to suggest this wasn't a false memory or teenage misunderstanding, but a moment that had shattered his sense of safety and identity. The father, whose identity is also being protected, was now caught in the middle. A man who had trusted his wife and left his son alone under her care. According to sources close to the case, the father was the one who reported the incident, an act of courage or perhaps desperation. He had witnessed something no parent ever should. And now he had to choose between the woman he loved and the son he swore to protect. It didn't take long for the case to make headlines. The name Alexis Yates was now synonymous with betrayal. Local news ran the story with bold graphics. Florida stepmom accused of sexual battery. But the details made it even more sensational and disturbing. A nurse, a mother figure, a living room encounter that ended in criminal charges. This wasn't just a crime, it was a breach of every boundary society holds sacred.
Authorities say the boy, just 15, was visiting his father when the incident occurred. Yates, a licensed healthcare worker, now faces serious charges that could put her behind bars. The community is stunned by the nature of the allegations.
On social media, reactions were swift. Many expressed horror. Others called for justice. And some questioned how something so horrific could happen inside an ordinary home. People began asking, where was the system? Could this have been prevented? And worst of all, was this the first time or just the first time she got caught? By the time the first court hearing arrived, Alexis Yates was already drowning in legal trouble. She was officially charged with a first-degree felony, sexual battery on a minor. If convicted, she could face up to life in prison. But here's where things became complicated. Because Alexis was the boy's stepmother, and not a stranger, the prosecution faced a delicate challenge. The law required them to prove coercion or a violation of custodial trust. And her defense team? They were ready to argue that the incident, if it happened at all, was not abuse, but misunderstood intimacy. It was a legal strategy that made many sick to their stomach, and yet, it was not new. In some cases where the adult and minor knew each other well, family, teacher, coach, the defense tries to suggest the child consented or misunderstood the situation. But under Florida law, a minor under 18 can't consent to sex with an adult. Period. Especially not a caregiver. As the courtroom date loomed, both sides were preparing for war. Witnesses were listed, evidence sealed. And Alexis? She remained out on bond, living in limbo, facing judgment from both the courts and the public eye. Outside the courtroom, another institution was making its own judgment, the Florida Board of Nursing. Alexis Yates, a registered nurse, was under investigation by the state's medical licensing body. Because when someone entrusted with patient care faces charges like these, the consequences go beyond criminal. The board opened a disciplinary review. If they found that Alexis's behavior violated ethical or legal standards, even without a conviction, she could lose her license permanently. Nurses are held to one of the highest codes of conduct in the country. If you violate trust in your personal life, especially involving a minor, it's a threat to public safety. Her license is absolutely on the chopping block. And it wasn't just her job. If convicted, Alexis Yates would be required to register as a sex offender for life. Her name, her face, her past, all accessible to the public forever. But in the middle of legal motions, public outrage, and media firestorms, was a 15-year-old boy. A teenager who had seen too much, said too much, and now had to carry the weight of it all. According to people familiar with the case, the boy is undergoing counseling. His identity remains protected, but his life has been forever changed. He now faces years of therapy, social stigma, and the emotional damage that comes from having your most personal trauma become national news. This is the part of the story that gets overlooked. The part that no court case, no prison sentence, no public apology can fix. Because when a caregiver crosses the line, it doesn't just break the law. It breaks a child's ability to trust. The courtroom was cold, stark. The kind of place where facts fight feelings and trauma is reduced to evidence. On one side, the prosecution, armed with the teen's testimony, digital forensics, and the father's statement. On the other, Alexis Yates, calm, composed, and fighting not just for her freedom, but for the denial of a reality everyone else seemed to accept. Her defense strategy? It leaned heavily on character. They painted her as a respected nurse, a loving wife, a woman incapable of such depravity. They hinted that the teen was confused, emotional, maybe even vindictive. Defense attorneys in cases like this often play on doubt, not by proving innocence, but by making the jury hesitate. Could a stepmom really do this? Is it possible the story was misinterpreted? Even one skeptical juror can unravel the whole case. But prosecutors pushed back hard. They argued that the boy had no motive to lie, that his detailed, emotionally consistent account was proof of something real, something disturbing. And then came the moment that shook the courtroom. When the teen, now a few months older, took the stand. His voice trembled. His eyes rarely looked up, but what he said was powerful. He described the night, the confusion, the moment his father walked in, and the shame that followed. He didn't cry, but the jury could feel the weight in his words, and sometimes silence says more than tears ever could. After days of testimony, hours of deliberation, and dozens of exhibits, the jury returned with a verdict. Alexis Yates was convicted of sexual battery on a minor. The courtroom was quiet. No outbursts, no cheers. Just the slow realization that lives had been permanently altered. She was led away in cuffs, her medical license suspended pending revocation. Her name entered into Florida's sex offender registry. The boy, now a survivor in the eyes of the law, walked out of that courtroom with his father. Not whole, but believed. This wasn't just a criminal case. It was a moral reckoning. A reminder that danger doesn't always wear a stranger's face. Sometimes it comes disguised in kindness, in family, in people we're told we should trust. Alexis Yates is no longer a nurse, no longer a wife. She is now a convicted felon. But more importantly, her victim is no longer voiceless. And what about the boy? He has a long road ahead. Therapy, healing, rebuilding his sense of self. But he also has something powerful, the truth, the courage to speak it, and a father who chose to stand by him, even when it meant destroying his marriage. In the end, justice did not come easily. It came through pain, exposure, and heartbreak. But it came. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, speak up. It's never too late to ask for help. And it's never wrong to demand accountability. Because behind every courtroom headline is a child waiting to be heard.